Chapter 4, Don't My Gal Look Good? Don't that cloud look lonesome coming across the deep blue sea? And don't my gal look good coming after me? Leroy Carr. The next week I spent at home with Sam trying to resolve my father's estate. She was his executor, a wise choice given the alternative. She had taken a leave of absence from her job teaching second grade in McLean when the general's cancer had been found. As always, there was also someone in love with her, a lawyer with the firm that handled the general's legal affairs. The size of the ring she wore indicated that he was serious, conventional, and probably rich. Once in a while, I heard the trailing end of his telephoned importunings as Sam fended him off. Drying out as best I could in anticipation of the semester ahead, I was in no mood for tea and sympathy with Charlie Boy, as I took to referring to Sam's young man. I didn't want to meet him or to acknowledge that he existed, but I could see Sam wanted us to meet, and I owed her that much. My antipathy, it turned out, was preternaturally apt. Charles D. Bledsoe, a stalwart paladin of capitalism and lawyerdom, had the excellent good fortune, for which I hated him heartily, of not being Sam's almost cousin. Charlie Boy was about my age and even looked a little like me, but not so scuffed and dinged. To enhance the resemblance, or so I flattered myself, Sam had encouraged him to grow a beard, and the result was an effect as manicured and artificial as a plucked eyebrow. I think he hated me on first sight as much as I hated him, but he was smart enough to play his cards close to his vest, knowing that I was Sam's favorite lost cause. Bledsoe had a failed marriage behind him. No kids, he informed me in italics. The world was better off for whatever contraceptive gizmo had spared us his iteration. Then there were his taste and prejudices. Bledsoe was a die-hard Reaganite, raved about the over-the-hill voice of Sinatra, had actually reread a Robert Ludlum novel, drank white wine, mentioned a family home on the Cape 4 times in 20 minutes, wore tasseled patent leather loafers, drove a BMW, had graduated Dartmouth and read law at Harvard, owned a spiffy townhouse in Georgetown, belonged to a health club, ordered bottled water with his white wine and called it a spritzer, subscribed to the Wall Street Journal and Playboy and Vanity Fair, disliked the Post, preferred Eisenhower to Truman, and said he had never heard of Robert Johnson. It figured that the general had actually liked this piece of shit. I decided that if I got drunk enough, I could get away with insulting him, but I didn't. Sam would only respect him the more for not insulting me back. Probably she would mistakenly attribute this restraint to his character, instead of to the habit of that circumspect profession which kept his purse lined. As I consumed the expensive French dinner that Charlie Boy had staked me to, I tried to see me from his side, the almost cousin, a disappointment to his father, a burnout ne'er-do-well, a refugee from a bad marriage who left it to others to clean up his messes, a drunk who smoked unfiltered Camels, a holier-than-thou spent bullet of a liberal Democrat, guarding the gates to Charlie Bledsoe's proposed sojourn in Eden with Samantha Callahan, the leggy beauty who would shine as his corporate consort and bear the children of his lawyer's loins. Yes, I tried to see it from his side, but it only made me want to throw Sam over my shoulder and make a run for the border. "So, Jack," he said in a phony Harvard accent, "what in God's name did you do in whatever place it was? Guatemala?" "Yes, Guatemala. For 2 years? I mean, what does anyone do in a godforsaken place like that?" "Everything I set out to," I said, blowing a cloud of smoke straight at him, which he tried unsuccessfully to dodge. "What was that?" He had this thin-lipped, supercilious, waspier-than-thou smile that managed to convey an insulting and completely unearned superiority. "To go native," I said. "Native?" he asked. "See that?" I tapped my nostril. The hole was for the little bone that went through my nose. Sam giggled. She was a little tight. She sidled over and hugged me, kissing me on the cheek. Charlie Boy's face had taken on a Dr. Strangelove quality, as though he was trying to weather an attack of tooth pain while smiling into the camera. Enjoying my role as dental probe, I hugged Sam back and kissed her chastely but noisily, like you'd kiss a baby. The bulging, deep sea creature gleam in Charlie's eyes throbbed with a nearly audible pain. So you wasted 2 years of your life leaving your father and Sam to pick up the pieces? What pieces? Sam shot Charlie a not now look, and she began irrelevantly to regale us with an account of her experiences the summer before at some summer camp for kids from the DC projects. A succession of neat whiskeys had begun to slow down my thinking and thicken my speech. I've never been belligerent when blotto, modeling myself on the original literary wasp, Beowulf. Drunk, he slew no hearth companions. Even though Charlie, hardly qualifying as a hearth companion, had begun in my estimation to take on sterling qualities like solvency, particularly the ability to stake me to a half bottle of bourbon at $10 an inch. We were both looking at Sam when generous feelings began to well up as I reached for another double. Sam cocked her head skeptically to take me in. I raised my glass and winked at her. Well, I said, here's to Sam, and any man she graces with her hand. There was confusion on Sam's face and phony delight on Charlie's. Without meaning to, I'd scored a palpable hit. I'm not married yet, Sam said. And I noticed for the first time she wasn't wearing the ring. Oh, I said intelligently. Well, Charlie said, I'm still the front runner, eh, Sam? Sam's smile was noncommittal. Having created this contretemps, I excused myself and goose-stepped off to the lobby, mistaking it for the hallway to the men's room. I compounded my mistake and strode brilliantly through the revolving doors onto the sidewalk. It was a clear, cold night, the stars so bright you could almost hear them shining like a symphony of icicles. My benevolence intensified as my sense of balance diminished. I found myself hugging a young elm more as a prop than as homage to Kilmer. From nowhere, I fished a line of Whitman. A mouse is miracle enough to stagger sextillions of infidels. The goofy hyperbole of this line had prompted me to hilarity as an undergraduate, but it seemed a noble sentiment now. A mouse, I said in parody of the forensic Richard Burton, is miracle enough. Now I was sonorous. Ralph Richardson. To stagger, spooky, wide-eyed John Carradine. Sextillions, the thrashing snake of Olivier in the last scene of the movie of Richard III. Of infidels, Gielgud as the somber Prospero. I turned and saw Sam smiling at me. She was leaning against the wall of the restaurant, her arms folded across her breast. When I stopped, I smiled what felt like, numb as I was, a lopsided grin. Through the door, I glimpsed Charlie Boy at the threshold of the coat check room. He was staring peevishly into the dining area, one patent leather foot tapping, its tassel flying. Very slowly, Sam walked over to me. When she touched my face with her hand, I kissed her palm and looked at her with what felt like all the hopeless longing of that moonless night of icicle stars. I love you, Sam, I said. I never meant to say it, not like that. The look on her face, I shall never forget it, was radiant. She reached down into my coat and pulled the lapels up and smoothed them. Then she leaned forward and kissed me on the soft part of my ear. For me, the trip home was suffused with the inarticulate promise of that kiss. The bourbon-bemused fog between my ears began to dissipate. It was early, perhaps 9, perhaps a little later. Sam asked Charlie Boy to drive us over the 14th Street Bridge. Take us around the Beltway, she said. She opened her window, flooding the back seat of the car where I was sitting with what felt like a blast straight from Alberta. Are you cold, Jackie? She asked me. I don't remember whether I said I was or I wasn't. I was looking directly into her eyes. I'm trying to wake you up, she said. Let me feel your cheek. Charlie Boy's eyes, narrow with impatience, flashed at me in the rearview mirror. He was a prince among men. In my mood, Mussolini was a prince among men. Sam touched my cheek. I brushed her fingertips with my lips. She stroked my mustache. I kept smiling wider and wider until it felt like my face was all teeth. Sam reached into her pocketbook. She put on Bonnie Raitt, Nick of Time. It was the right song for the moment. I felt like one of those electric, oil-filled radiators, as if some hand, Sam's, was slowly turning up the dial. She smiled at me, crinkling up the corners of her eyes. You better take us home, she said, looking straight at me. I need to put Jackie to bed. My heart was racing. It was somewhere ahead of the Beamer's hood ornament, streaming towards home. While inside with the cold wind bracing me up, I sat grinning, a George Dickel Buddha. When we got to my father's house, I made a quick goodbye. I wasn't sure what Sam was going to do. I must have walked slowly because by the time I reached the door, Sam, with her long-legged strides, was right behind me. I didn't have the key. I heard the Beamer rev twice as Charlie Boy double-clutched into reverse. Sam was looking at me as if she wanted to swim right into my eyes. When we entered the house, I reached for the light, and her hand covered mine. "No," she said. "Kiss me, Jack." I turned to face her. The glass side panel door with a fan of glass overhead threw a moony shadow into the hallway of light borrowed from street lamps. I could make out the shape of her hair, a flicker of eye gleam. I could smell the wine on her mouth before I tasted it. I didn't kiss her deep. I didn't want to rush the moment. My hand dropped to her hip, and she pressed it in answer. It was a long kiss. She led me to her room. It wasn't what the general would have called ready for inspection. One tall boot, bent halfway up, stood beside the bed. The pulled-out drawers of her dresser formed a kind of crazy staircase to the mirror where I could see her reflection and my own. "Take off your coat, Jack." I took it off. "Lie down." "Where?" I asked. "On the bed." She pushed me down. Some sense of the enormity of what we were about to do gave me a scintilla of hesitation. "Cousin Sam." She put her finger on my lips. "Shh, shh, Jackie." "Sam?" I know. She was on top of me, kissing me. She got me out of my shirt. I heard a button pop. Sam giggled. Oh, she kissed me. "I guess I'll have to do some sewing tomorrow." "I reckon I'll have to do some sewing myself tonight," I said. "I'm fixing to hook up my plow right now." She lay back and laughed at this and then sighed. "Stay put." I wasn't going anywhere. She reached over me and turned on the Cowboy Junkies. Then she stood up. Her dress rustled up and over with a noise like wind in the leaves. She stood in a shaft of light, her exposed breast full and round. She shook her hair out of the last bit of braid that had entwined it. She had a long back, full buttocks, and long full legs. Then she sighed a melody of longing and requital. She knelt over me and threw her head back and began to rock back and forth. Then she bent down and kissed me, holding my tongue in her mouth, while she moved her hips in a rhythm like the sea, lapping the shore as the tide rose slowly, enveloping us both.